Continuing our conversation on psychological disorders, now examining mood disorders. We'll be examining major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, prevalence and course of depression, genetic influences on depression, suicide and self injury, negative moods and negative thoughts, and then the vicious cycle. Major depressive disorder is more than just feeling down, more than just feeling sad about something. Bipolar disorder is more than mood swings. Depression plus a problematic overly up mood called mania. Here are the criteria for major depressive disorders. Major depressive disorder is not just one of these symptoms, it is one or both of the first two plus three or more of the rest. So we have depressed mood most of the day and or markedly diminished interest or pleasure in activities. Significant increase or decrease in appetite or weight. Insomnia, sleeping too much or disrupted sleep. Lethargy or physical agitation. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. Worthlessness or excessive inappropriate guilt. Daily problems in thinking, concentrating, and or making decisions. Recurring thoughts of death and suicide. Depression is everywhere. Depression shows up in people seeking treatment. Phobias are the most common, frequently experienced disorder. But depression is the number one reason people seek mental health services. Depression appears worldwide. Per year, depressive episodes happen to about 6% of men and about 9% of women. Over the course of a lifetime, 12% of Canadians and 17% of USA citizens or residents experience depression. Depression, sometimes been referred to as the common cold of disorders. Although both are common, occurring frequently and pervasively, comparing depression to a cold doesn't work. Depression is more dangerous because of suicide risk, has fewer observable symptoms, is more lasting than a cold, and is less likely to go away with just time. And it is much less contagious. And depressive pain is beyond the sniffles. But we do see seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. Seasonal affective disorder is more than simply disliking winter. It involves a recurring seasonal pattern of depression, usually during winter's short, dark, cold days. A survey could be done. Have you cried today? Results more people saying yes or answering yes during the winter months. So here we see a percentage here of men asked in August, 4%. If they're asked in December, 8%. It doubles. For women in August, when they're asked, only 7% had cried, but then it goes up to 21, three times as much, 21 in December. Bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder was once called manic depressive disorder. Two polar opposites. Moods are depression and mania. Mania refers to a period of hyper elevated mood that is euphoric, giddy, easily irritated, hyperactive, impulsive, overly optimistic, and even grandiose. Contrasting the symptoms. So let's look at depressed mood, stuck feeling down with exaggerated pessimism, social withdrawal, lack of felt pleasure, inactivity and no initiative, difficulty focusing, fatigue and excessive desire to sleep. Compared to the other polar opposite, the mania, where you're euphoric, giddy. You have exaggerated optimism, hypersociality, as well as sexuality, delight in everything, impulsivity and overactivity, racing thoughts, the mind just won't settle down, and little desire for sleep. Bipolar disorder and creative success. Many famous and successful people have lived with the ups and downs of bipolar disorder. Some speculate that the depressive periods gave them ideas and the manic episodes gave them creative energy. Bipolar disorder in children and adolescents. Does bipolar disorder show up before adulthood and even before puberty? Many young people have cycles of depression to extended rage rather than mania. The DSM-5 may have a new diagnosis for some of these kids, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. Understanding mood disorders. Why are mood disorders so pervasive, especially among women? You can see across the globe here they have selected several nations, males and females compared. Percentage of adults experiencing major depressive in previous 12 months. Around the world, women tend to be more susceptible to depression. Women starting in adolescence appear to ruminate more, have deeper sadness than men, encounter more stressors, and report their depression more readily. Understanding mood disorders. Can we explain why does depression often go away on its own? The course and development of reactive depression. Oftentimes, Often time heals a mood disorder, especially when the mood issue is in reaction to a stressful event, meaning we just simply get better. However, a significant portion of people with major depressive disorder do not automatically or easily get better with time. There are biological aspects and explanations, focusing on things that are evolutionary in nature, genetic, or the brain and body. We have social cognitive aspects and explanations as well, focusing on things like negative thoughts and negative mood, or explanatory style, or the vicious cycle. An evolutionary perspective on the biology of depression. Depression, in its milder, non disordered form, may have had survival value in the past. Under stress, depression is simply social emotional hibernation. It allows humans to conserve energy, avoid conflicts and other risks, let go of unattainable goals, take time to contemplate. Biology of depression genetics. Evidence of genetic influence on depression. There have been DNA linkage analysis reveals depressed gene regions. Twin and adoption heritability studies also. By looking at the graph, we can see the type of disorder, the different colors here, bipolar, schizophrenia, anorexia nervosa, and the percentage of heritability. From certain studies, the aggregated data from these studies of identical and fraternal twins estimate that heritability of bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anorexia nervosa, and so on. So this all points there's some sort of genetic relationship between these types of things. And if you share genetics, then you're also going to be more likely to share the same types of disorders. Biology of depression and the brain. Brain activity is diminished in depression and increased in mania. Brain structure, smaller frontal lobes in depression and fewer axons in bipolar disorder. Brain cell communication, neurotransmitters, more norepinephrine arousing in mania and less in depression, and reduced serotonin in depression. Suicide and self-injury. Every year, 1 million people commit suicide, giving up on the process of trying to cope and improve their emotional well-being. This can happen when people feel frustrated, trapped, isolated, ineffective, and see no end to these feelings. Non-suicidal self-injury has other functions such as sending a message, distracting from emotional pain, giving oneself permission to feel, or self-punishment. Understanding mood disorders, the social cognitive perspective. Depression is associated with low self-esteem, discounting positive information, and assuming the worst about self, situation, and the future. Learned helplessness, Self-defeating beliefs such as assuming that one self is unable to cope, unable to improve, and to achieve or to be happy. Rumination, stuck focusing on what's bad. In depressive explanatory style. Now, for the depressive explanatory style, how we analyze bad news will predict our mood. So let's say we have a problematic event, a breakup with a romantic partner. The assumptions that we make about the problem will inform us as to what our future may be like when it comes to being depressed or not. So we have a breakup with a romantic partner. The problem is stable. I will never get over this. Or it can be seen as temporary. This is hard to take, but I will get through this. The problem is global. Without my partner, I can't seem to do anything right. Or it can be seen as specific. I miss my partner, but thankfully I have family and other friends. The problem is internal. Our breakup was all my fault. Or it can be seen as external. It takes two, excuse me, it takes two to make a relationship work, and it wasn't meant to be. So the mood or the result that goes along with these views are the following. If it's stable, global, or internal, then we see most likely depression. But if the breakup was temporary, specific, external, then most likely we'll see successful coping. Depression's vicious cycle. A depressed mood may develop when a person with a negative outlook experiences repeated stress. So we have a stressful event or stressful experience. Then we go use a negative explanatory style, which then depresses our mood, which then impacts and changes our cognition and our behavior, which may then cause more stressful experiences. So the depressed mood changes a person's style of thinking and interacting in a way that makes stressful experiences more likely. This is depression's vicious cycle. Now let's look at schizophrenia. Split from reality and from oneself. Schizophrenia symptoms: disorganized thinking or delusions, disturbed perceptions such as hallucinations, unusual emotions and actions including flat affect or catatonia, subtypes, onset and course of schizophrenia. The causes of the symptoms: we have the brain, dopamine overactivity, abnormal brain anatomy and activity, maternal virus during pregnancy, and associated genes. Schizophrenia. The mind is split from reality, a split from one's own thoughts so that they appear as hallucinations. A psychosis refers to a mental split from reality and rationality. Schizophrenia symptoms include disorganized and or delusional thinking, disturbed perceptions, and inappropriate emotions and actions. The key thing and the most noticeable thing, however, is a split from reality. Positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Positive: the presence of problematic behaviors, hallucinations, especially perceptions, especially auditory, you're hearing voices that aren't there. Delusions, illusory beliefs, especially that of persecution, disorganized thought and nonsensical speech, and bizarre behaviors. Positive symptoms of schizophrenia. Negative symptoms are the absence of healthy behaviors. So you have flat affect, no emotion showing on the face, reduced social interaction, no feeling of enjoyment, less motivation, initiative, and focus on task, speaking less or moving less. Schizophrenia symptoms: problem in thinking and speaking. Disorganized speech, including word salad of loosely associated phrases. Delusion: Delusions or illusory beliefs, often bizarre and not just mistaken. Most common are delusions of grandeur or persecution. Problems with selective attention, difficulty filtering thoughts and choosing which thoughts to believe and to say out loud. Disturbed perceptions. People with schizophrenia often experience hallucinations, that is, perceptual experiences not shared by others, meaning that you experience this thing, but no one else in the same room can experience them either. The most common form of hallucination is hearing voices that no one else hears, often with upsetting or shaming content. Hallucinations can also be visual, olfactory, smells, tactile, touch, or gustatory taste. Inappropriate emotions and actions. Odd and socially inappropriate responses such as looking bored or amused while hearing of a death. Flat affect. Facial or body expression is flat with no visible emotional content. Impaired perception of emotions, including not reading others' intentions and feelings. The schizophrenic body exhibits such symptoms such as repetitive behaviors such as rocking and rubbing, catatonia such as sitting motionless and unresponsive for hours. The onset and development of schizophrenia. Typically, schizophrenic symptoms appear at the end of adolescence and early adulthood, later for women than for men. Prevalence. Nearly 1 in 100 people develop schizophrenia, slightly more men than women. Development. The course of schizophrenia can be acute or reactive or chronic. Acute reactive schizophrenia. In reaction to stress, some people develop positive symptoms such as hallucinations. Recovery is likely. Chronic process schizophrenia develops slowly with more negative symptoms. With treatment and support, there may be periods of normal life, but not a cure. Without treatment, this type of schizophrenia often leads to poverty and social problems. Subtypes of schizophrenia. We have paranoid, plagued by hallucinations, often with negative messages and delusions, both grandiose and feelings of persecution. Disorganized. Primary symptoms are flat affect, incoherent speech, and random behavior. Or catatonic, rarely initiating or controlling movement, copies others' speech and actions. Undifferentiated, many varied symptoms. And residual. Withdrawal continues after positive symptoms have disappeared. Understanding schizophrenia. What's going on in the brain in schizophrenia? Abnormal brain structure and activity. Too many dopamine D04 receptors help to explain paranoia and hallucination. It's like taking amphetamine overdose all the time. Poor coordination of neural firing in the frontal lobes impairs judgment and self-control. The thalamus fires during hallucinations as if real sensations were being received. There's general shrinking of many brain areas and connections between them. Are there biological risk factors affecting early development? Schizophrenia is somewhat more likely to develop when one or more of these factors is present. Low birth weight, maternal diabetes, older paternal age, famine, oxygen deprivation during delivery, maternal virus during mid-pregnancy impairing brain development. Schizophrenia is more likely to develop in babies born during and after flu epidemics in densely populated areas, a few months after flu season, after mothers had the flu during the second trimester or had antibodies showing a viral infection. The lesson is to get flu shots with early fall pregnancies. Are there genetic risk factors? If so, we would see more similar schizophrenic risks shared between identical twins rather than fraternal twins. Do we? Schizophrenic risk for twins of those diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so what we see here quite clearly from this chart is that there is greatly more schizophrenia shared between identical twins than compared to fraternal twins. If one twin has schizophrenia, the chance of the other one also having it are much greater if the twins are identical. Having adoptive siblings or parents with schizophrenia does not increase the likelihood of developing schizophrenia. Genetic and prenatal causes. Even in quadruplets, genetics do not fully predict schizophrenia. This could be because of environmental differences. First difference, twins in separate placentas. Only one of the two twins has enlarged ventricles seen in schizophrenia. The Ghanaian quadruplets share genes and all have schizophrenia, but at different levels of severity. Genes may interact with environment to produce this pattern. Other disorders, including dissociative personality and eating disorders. Dissociative disorders. Dissociation, a separation of conscious awareness from thoughts, memory, bodily sensations, feelings, or even from identity. Dissociative disorder, dysfunction and distress caused by chronic and severe dissociation. Examples: dissociative fugue state and dissociative identity disorder. In the fugue state, fugue is running away, wandering away from one's life, memory, and identity with no memory of them. And dissociative identity disorder, development of separate personalities. DID, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. In the rare actual cases of DID, the personalities are distinct and not present in consciousness at the same time. Now, remember, personality is going to be a consistent way that you think, feel, and behave over time and across situations. Here, it's communicating the idea that there's more than one personality in one body. They are distinct and not present in consciousness at the same time. They may or may not appear to be aware of each other. It is somewhat of a controversial type of diagnosis, this DID. There are alternative explanations for DID. Dissociative identities might just be an extreme form of playing a role. DID in North America might be a recent cultural construction similar to the idea of being possessed by evil spirits. Cases of DID might be created or worsened by therapists encouraging people to think of different parts of themselves. DID or DID not. Evidence that DID is real. Different personalities have involved different brainwave patterns, different left-right-handedness, different visual acuity and eye muscle balance patterns. Patients with DID also show heightened activity in areas of the brain associated with managing and inhibiting traumatic memories. Explaining fragmentation of personality from different perspectives. Psychoanalytic perspective, diverting id, cognitive perspective, coping with abuse, learning perspective, disassociation pays, Social influence. Therapists encourage you. Now, eating disorders. Anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. These may involve unrealistic body image and extreme body ideal, a desire to control food and the body when one situation can't be controlled, cycles of depression, and health problems. Anorexia nervosa, compulsion to lose weight coupled with certainty about being fat despite being 15% or more underweight. It occurs in 0.6%. Meet the criteria at some point in lifetime. Bulimia nervosa, compulsion to binge, eating large amounts fast, then purge by losing the food through vomiting, laxatives, or extreme exercise. Binge eating disorder, compulsion to binge followed by guilt and depression. Eating disorders associated factors. We have family factors. Having a mother focused on her weight and on child's appearance and weight. Negative self-evaluation in the family. For bulimia, if childhood obesity runs in the family. For anorexia, if families are competitive, high-achieving, and protective. Cultural factors. Unrealistic ideals of body appearance, which obviously we may see more in societies like ours, where we have a great deal of media presence, models on television, on magazines, etc., and so forth, that give us an image of what the body should look like. Personality disorders. Personality disorders are enduring patterns of social and other behavior that impair social functioning. There are three clusters or categories of personality disorders: anxious, avoidant personality disorder, ruled by fear of social rejection; eccentric or odd, schizoid personality disorder, with flat affect and no social attachments; and dramatic, histrionic, attention-seeking, narcissistic, self-centered, and antisocial, amoral. The anxious cluster, avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Eccentric, odd, detached cluster, we have schizoid, schizotypal, paranoid personality disorder, and dramatic, erratic, impulsive cluster with histrionic, narcissistic, antisocial, and borderline personality disorders. The antisocial personality disorder, persistently acting without conscience, without a sense of guilt for harm done to others, strangers and family alike, it does not matter. The diagnostic criteria include a pattern of violating the rights of others since age 15, including three of these: deceitfulness, disregard for the safety of self or others; aggressiveness, failure to conform to social norms; lack of remorse, impulsivity, and failure to plan ahead; irritability, irresponsibility regarding jobs, family, and money. Which kids may develop APD as adults? About half children with persistent antisocial behavior develop lifelong APD. Which kids are at risk? Psychological factors. Those who in preschool were impulsive, uninhibited, unconcerned with social rewards, and low in anxiety. Those who endured child abuse and or inconsistent, unavailable caretaking. Biological APD risk factors. Antisocial or unemotional biological relatives increases risk. Some associated genes have been identified. Lower levels of stress hormones and low physiological arousal in stressful situations. Fear conditioning is impaired. Reduced prefrontal cortex tissue leads to impulsivity. Substance dependence is more likely. Antisocial personality disorder in criminality. So, looking at the chart graph here, criminals, people who repeatedly commit crimes, and then looking at people with antisocial personality disorder, there is some overlap. Okay? Many career criminals do show empathy and selflessness with family and friends. That's the difference. With families and friends, they have empathy and they're not selfish. But many people with APD do not commit crimes. So there's not exactly total overlap. But people with APD do not necessarily have that same caring about family and friends. So we have people with APD who do not commit crimes, but they also are people with APD. We have criminals who commit crimes but may not have the antisocial personality disorder that or the symptoms that we see with those individuals. Antisocial crime associated factors. Though antisocial personality disorder is not a full picture of most criminal activity, what can we say about people who commit crime, especially violent crime? Lower levels of physiological arousal, measured here as adrenaline levels, under stress may enable them to take violent action without feeling anxiety or panic. So here, because they have this lower level, they don't stress out as much, they're more capable of doing what they see themselves as requiring or need to do. So males with criminal convictions as adults had lower levels of arousal as 13-year-olds. Biosocial roots of crime, the brain. People who commit murder seem to have less tissue and activity in the part of the brain that suppresses impulses. Other differences include less amygdala response when viewing violence and an overactive dopamine reward seeking system. How common are psychological disorders? Countries vary greatly in the percentage of people reporting mental health issues in the past year. Prior year prevalence of disorders in selected areas from World Health Organization of 20 countries. So we see here serious mental disorders compared to any mental disorders. Again, a lot would go into this. For example, the culture of the particular country with regard to the ease and less stigmatizing of being able to identify someone as having a mental issue. So these factors do play a role in reporting. Rates of psychological disorders. This list takes a closer look at the past year's prevalence of various mental health diagnoses. Here, generalized anxiety, social phobia, phobia of specific objects. So if we look at the most common ones that we see here, any mental disorder, 26%. But the one that appears next is going to be mood disorder. Those things like dealing with depression. And then, of course, we have phobias. Vulnerable factors and ages for developing mental disorders. Who is vulnerable to mental disorders? Poverty increases the risk of many mental disorders, including aggression and anxiety. Disorders decrease when poverty is lifted. Immigrant paradox. Despite the stress of immigrating, those who immigrate to the U.S. have a lower risk of disorders than those born in the U.S. Age of vulnerability. Many disorders begin to show symptoms by early adulthood, developing on average around age 20. OCD, schizophrenia, bipolar, and alcohol dependence. Showing some signs earlier are phobias around median age of 10 and antisocial personality disorder, some symptoms by age 8. And developing later than 20, major depressive disorder. Outcomes for people with psychological disorders. There are risks to be watchful of, obstacles to be overcome, and improvements to be made, often with the help of and with treatment. Some people with psychological disorders do not recover. Some achieve greatness even with the psychological disorder.